Joining us today is Lyla El-Fayomi, who is a PhD student in molecular genetics at the University of Toronto. You've already heard Lyla discuss her thesis work on the effects of opiates on mouse brains in our last video. In this video, we'll get to trace Lyla's career path through undergrad research and graduate school, including how she found the lab she currently conducts her research in.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that leads well into another question that we have for you, which is how did you develop your research interests?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was in high school, I actually wanted to be a doctor. And I applied to the University of Toronto, Mississauga campus for the life science program. And it was about halfway through my second year that I took a lab course for the first time, and I just fell in love with it. I loved the bench work. I loved the idea of research, and so I wanted to test things out. I started volunteering at a lab, and this lab, it studied the neuroscience of social interaction using fruit flies. And some of your viewers might be thinking, fruit flies? I mean, how complex could a fruit fly possibly be? But these little guys, they've got spectacular brains, and they've got many, many similar genes to the ones that we have. And so they make a really, really great model to study different conditions or different concepts related to people. But anyways, yeah, so from that point forward, I loved the idea of going into work every day and doing something that nobody in the entire world has ever done before. Because you're wading into the unknown with research. You're on the frontier of progress. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
So how did you come across that opportunity, and did you find any other undergrad opportunities?
Yes, so for that specific opportunity, I actually just talked to the TA of that lab course that I really loved. I remember this conversation vividly. So I told her that I wanted to be her. I wanted to be a graduate student, studying the brain in some capacity. Her name is Rebecca Rook. She's remarkable. But anyway, so hearing this, she recruited me to that specific lab. So it was Dr. Joel Levine's lab at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And I worked my way up from making food for the fruit flies to being given my own research project looking at brain disorders, including autism and schizophrenia. And that wasn't the only research opportunity that I had technically. So in my final year, I did an ROP, but it wasn't technically, it didn't involve bench work per se. So this was a joint supervision between a biostatistics lab and a sort of a visual design sort of lab, but as it relates to biology. So at UTM, we have a whole department that does biomedical animations and illustrations, and they're kind of the people who make those pretty diagrams and animations that you see in textbooks and in those kind of nice presentations on YouTube, which is so important. So my job was to create a biostatistical case study for an intro stats course. And then I illustrated, animated, and narrated it to try and help students through the concepts so that they could understand what exactly was trying to be communicated and how to approach the different problems. And science communication at the time was so new. So this was 2017, I believe, and it wasn't really a big thing. So it wasn't a risky project, but it's something that turned out to be a wonderful surprise with how the end result turned out. And we actually won the top prize at the ROP fair that year because it turned out to be something really important that people kind of wanted to see more and more of. So I would say that those were the two major research sorts of opportunities that I had during my undergraduate degree.
Would you say that these two experiences influenced the way that you went forward from undergrad?
I definitely would. So I think it was that lab opportunity where I was actually doing that kind of fruit fly research in my undergrad that cemented the fact that I wanted to go into research. I wanted to be at the bench, kind of on the front lines of science. And so it was a really important experience for me to actually live it and understand what it's like rather than just kind of hearing about it secondhand from someone. And it also helped steer which program that I ultimately ended up in. So UTM had a lot of molecular biology courses, and I loved them all, and especially the lab ones. And so I felt like I had such a good foundation there and a really strong interest in it that I was ready immediately to just apply for grad school and get started right away.
Coming all the way back to currently, after your PhD, do you plan on working as a postdoc, or what are your plans now?
Yeah, that's another really great question. So I know I definitely want to remain in research, but beyond this, I'm trying to stay open-minded. Like, I'd love to be a professor and to have my own lab eventually, but in a few years when I graduate, the way I'm thinking about it is, who knows how different the world will look like at that point, and whether or not career paths will even take the same forms that they do now. And so I think my approach to this is remaining informed, knowing my options, but not necessarily committing myself to any one idea about the future just yet.
Would you consider staying in the same field or branching off into something else that you're interested in?
I love neuroscience. I feel like this is going to be a lifelong endeavor for me. I can't see myself in any other field.
I'd like to backtrack a little bit and just get into how you applied to grad school and how in particular you found the lab that you're at right now, because it seems like you really love what you're doing. And I think a lot of our viewers would love to know about your story.
The same year that I graduated with my HBSc, I started grad school right away. But the problem was, when I was looking for different graduate school programs to apply to, I knew I wanted neuroscience, I knew I wanted molecular biology, but I didn't know exactly which path that I wanted to take, because just saying molecular bio and just saying neuroscience leaves you with a ton of options. It's not specific enough. So I found this program, the molecular genetics program, which allows you to actually rotate through 3 to 4 different labs in the department before picking where you want to settle for your thesis work, which is amazing for people like me back in the day. I didn't know what I wanted to do per se specifically. And so the molecular genetics department has over 100 faculty. So you have so many choices. You've got everything from work with C. elegans, which is a tiny little worm. You've got fruit flies, you've got rodents, you've got stem cells, both mouse stem cells and actual patient stem cells. So the options were really endless, and it seemed like the smartest choice for me. And so Dr. Derek Vanderkoy, he's my research supervisor, and he was actually my final rotation. He was my 3rd rotation. And I couldn't imagine myself anywhere else. It just clicked really, really nicely. Everything about the lab just seemed like an ideal fit for me. But the other labs that I rotated through were wonderful. There are no bad choices in a department like this. All of the PIs are incredible, and I personally would feel lucky to work with any of them, but Derek's lab was definitely the one for me at the end of the day.
So this is something that I've been wondering after getting to work with a couple of supervisors. And since you've had the chance to rotate through a few different labs, would you say that part of the clicking feeling, like knowing that, oh yes, I'm supposed to be here, do you think that has to do with like how you interact with your supervisor, like whether you click with the other lab members? How have you found that the interactions change with different people? Because I've also spoken to people who say, oh, I didn't click with this one, but I clicked with this one, and it didn't have to do with the topic, but rather it was just like how the two people work together.
For me, it was the work definitely played a role. So I loved the project. I thought it was an incredible question, and the techniques that we were using, the fact that I would get to use optogenetics, and I would learn how to do stereotaxic brain surgery on mice. All of these things were very interesting to me, and I saw myself in that work. But of course, there is definitely the element of the mentor, so the supervisor that you're going to be working with, and their mentorship style. So I see why the people that you've spoken to maybe would have told you that it would be contingent on the PI themselves and your kind of dynamic with them. Derek, I think my favorite things about him is that he's just got this like prolific knowledge base. You can ask him about anything in neuroscience, and I'm not even exaggerating right now, and he'll have an answer for it. And that's something that I wanted for myself. And the other thing is he's such a thinker. Like you can have a meeting with him and you'll just sit down and think about a question, think out loud, go back and forth on it. And so those were elements that I really enjoyed. So yeah, I would say that those are the two most important things, the mentor and the work. In terms of lab mates truly, truly come and go. So you'll sometimes you'll be entering a lab where not all of them, but most of the lab members will be graduating that year. And then it's pretty much just going to be you and the work and your mentor. And so the lab mates aren't a permanent situation. So even if there's one that you don't really work well with, or one that you work really, really well with, those things shouldn't influence your decisions per se. I mean, it might play a role in the training elements. So as you get caught up to speed on the different methods and techniques on the project, but ultimately, I feel personally like that comes down to you and your work ethic, your search of the literature, and the way you approach training on a technique. So maybe I'd put less emphasis on lab mates than the mentor themselves and the project. But that's my personal opinion. You know, other people might approach this in a different way to that, which is completely fine. You know what? Everyone has a certain set of criteria that makes them feel more comfortable, and that's okay. Like my metric can be different to yours, and at the end of the day, if that works for you, that's completely fine.